up, y'all, and welcome to another episode of Worldly Church Girl. It's your girl, your host, Lillian Harshaw. On today's show, I have Christian hip-hop artist. He is an author, the pastor of the phenomenal, multicultural, diverse church in Tampa, Florida called Crossover Church, Tommy Urban D. Kyllonen. From a child from Philly who ran from his calling to being a pastor of a church of what Outreach Magazine calls America's most innovative churches. You have a bachelor's in pastoral theology. You're a pastor of a multi-ethnic, multi-generational, multi-class church for over 15 years now. You've been featured in USA Today, Newsweek, CBS, BET, and probably some other places that I have no idea about, but you've just been worldwide. You're an author of 4 books. You're a publisher of your own magazine. You're on your own TV show. And you also host conferences to help other leaders in the ministry. Your plate is beyond full. Let's just say that.
You just read all that, and I'm just getting tired. I'm like, man, I read all that? Man, I need to go take a nap.
So I want to start with your growing up in your childhood. Did you see yourself in the ministry, or did you just go kicking and screaming?
Yeah, so I grew up in Philly, and I'm a PK. And if you don't know what that church lingo is, that stands for pastor's kid. You know, there was people that were always like coming up to me saying, yeah, you're going to be like your father when you grow up. You're going to be a pastor. And I'll be like, no, you know. And so, yeah, I was that guy that went kicking and screaming. I didn't really want to have anything to do with it. I'm like, if I just go to church, you'll be lucky, you know. But and it's not that I saw my dad or my family do anything that they shouldn't have. They were always great and great godly role models. But I just saw the pressure and the stress that it could bring, and even just some of the stuff my dad and mom had to go through, you know, navigating, leading a church. And I was like, yeah, I don't want none of that. Like, I'm good, you know. And so I didn't see myself. I had some rebellious years, believed in God, but was rebelling as a teenager. But when I was 18, 19 years old, that was a season when God really began to get a hold of me and went back to my spiritual roots and felt a calling to go into urban ministry. And so, you know, I went to Bible college and started to figure out what those next steps would look like.
And when you graduated after you got your bachelor's degree, you and your wife started a youth ministry at Crossover. What was that like to start something so innovative, especially in 96, when everybody was still in that wonderful Christian box?
Yeah, it was, well, the cool thing about it was, so we had planned on going back up north. I'm from Philly. My wife's from New York City. And so we met at Bible college in Florida. And so, you know, we liked Florida, but we're like, you know, we're going back up north. But God had different plans. And so those of you that are listening to this today, you can have your plans, but hey, you got to make sure it's God's plans. And
Amen.
I tried to make some plans for God and didn't work out so good. So God brought us to Tampa, and it was a young urban church plant that was just a few years old. There was about 40 adults, mostly older. There was only one teenage girl that was in the church, and they wanted to launch a youth ministry because they had a strong children's ministry, and they did outreach in the housing projects. They did this thing called Sidewalk Sunday School. But when those kids would become, you know, young teenagers, they would fade out and they would lose them because the church didn't have anything for them. And so, you know, they said, we want you to come in and create a youth ministry, you know, here in the urban context, and you have full freedom to do whatever. And so, you know, pastors and leaders can say that you have freedom, but then when you start to do some things that are out the box, then they might like call you in for the meeting. Well, what I meant was, you know, listen, for real, I never had that conversation. My pastor back then, like he was wild. He had an earring. Yeah, tattoos. This was in the 90s, and this guy was like in his late 40s, you know, and so
he was revolutionary.
He was more radical in some ways than I was, you know. And so, but yeah, they really gave us freedom to try new things and do new things. And so I was into basketball, so we did a basketball league that I organized, and every kid that played in it, I raised money from businesses to buy them a brand new pair of sneakers. So the deal was play in this basketball league that's free. And if you finish the 4-week, league or 6-week league, I think it was in the beginning, then you get a free pair of Nikes. And so, all these kids from the hood were like, yo, let's go. About 80 kids that signed up and about 60 kids completed it. And we did this big awards ceremony at the church, in a church service where we presented them with their sneakers and their families came. And that's really how I built my youth group. They knew me as coach and DJ because I would bring the sound system out and play Christian hip hop. They knew me as that before they knew me as youth pastor. And so that's how I grew the youth ministry. And within the first year, the youth ministry became larger than the church in numbers. Remember, the church only had about 40 people coming on Sundays, adults. And we had more than that by the end of the year coming to the youth ministry. And then fast forward over the next few years, it grew to where we had hundreds that were coming every Thursday night. And so sports and music, we started doing hip hop concerts and events. Sports and music were the two big things we used to reach the next generation for Christ.
You had to have been overwhelmed by the response that all these young people were coming in droves like that. You had to have been. Yeah,
we were overwhelmed at times. We were excited, but then like, oh my gosh, because there was some times when I remember the one season, I think it was 1999, and our youth ministry was running about 70 or 80 at the time. And we only had about, I was just really starting to build a solid leadership team. There was probably about 10 of us, 9 or 10 of us, including me and my wife, that were like solid. And then we did a couple of big events because we were learning how to promote and like do flyers, and we had a street team. And so we did a couple big events, and we had like 250 teenagers come. And then like the next week there was like still like over 200. Because we thought, okay, well, this was just an event. We'll go back down to under 100 again. No, the next week we were at over 200 still. And it stayed like that. And so we just suddenly had this huge learning curve because the youth ministry more than doubled, at this one season. And, we didn't have enough leaders, and, all these new kids were there. And when you have so many new kids in the mix and they don't, know how to maybe respect it, it got a little wild.
Mm-hmm.
Fights. These were unchurched kids. A lot of them were, busting them in from the housing projects and from different projects. And so they'd be wanting to like have, fight against the different neighborhoods. And so, yeah, it was challenging at some moments, but God was moving in the services. Kids were coming to Jesus. We're praying for kids, and the way we presented it. So our praise and worship in the beginning, we tried to have a guy on the keyboard and try to do worship with kind of an urban flavor, but it just wasn't working. These kids just, they were unchurched. They had no church. They didn't know what worship was. And I was tempted to say, maybe we shouldn't just do worship. Maybe we'll just do a rap song and we'll have a game and we'll do the message. And these kids just don't know how to worship. I was about to give up on worship, but the Lord really put in my heart, like, no, don't give up on worship. There's a breakthrough that's about to happen.
Yes.
And this young guy started coming, and he was a DJ, and he said, hey man, I just got some turntables. What if I bring my turntables and maybe we can match up some beats with some worship songs, and maybe the kids will be into that because worship ain't working right now. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's try anything because what we're doing now is not working.
Right.
So next week, he came a little early, got with our guy that was the singer to lead worship, and they matched up some of the same worship songs we were doing, but he matched them up with hip hop and R&B beats. And so, man, like the kids that night, they lit up. And so, normally we would do 2 songs, and after the first song, they'd all sit down and we'd be like, no, stand up. We got one more song. Well, this night we did our 2 songs, and when we ended, they were all still standing, and they're all like, yo, let's sing another one. And we were looking at each other like, what? Same group of kids?
Right.
Driving the kids home that night, and they're actually singing these worship songs in the van. And it's because musically now it connected with them.
Right.
And so that was like one of those aha moments. And so we've used a DJ in all of our church services since 1998. And so if you come to our church on a Sunday morning, we have a built-in DJ booth with a DJ on the stage. So when you walk in, the DJ is spinning music. During the announcements and the offering, he's spinning like an instrumental bed. Even when I come out and start preaching, sometimes he starts out with a little beat to kind of, give it some vibe. And yeah, when everyone leaves, the DJ spinning as everyone's walking out. So it's a real celebratory type of atmosphere. And that's just kind of been a staple, and it just works really well.
So moving forward, January 2002, you get to be the lead pastor of the church.
Yeah, I don't get to. I have to. So the leadership and the pastor stepped to me and they were like, listen, the youth ministry is going so well. Why don't you just take over? And I mean, I had these conversations multiple times, and I'm always like, nah, I'm good. I don't have time to do that. The youth ministry is like booming, and I was a hip hop artist. And in 1999, I got signed to a record label. So I was regularly traveling. I didn't go on per se like tours for weeks or months, but I would do like several one-offs where they'd fly me out I do that, at least 2 or 3, sometimes 4 or 5 times a month. And I would fly to a different city, do a concert, do some ministry, fly back, And so I would rarely ever miss our church services, so I'd usually do that on like Fridays and Saturdays. And that was really like my job. That was providing income for my family because the church was small and in the urban context, and they weren't always able to pay me consistently. And even when they paid me, it was really kind of like a part-time, job. Right. So I was kind of like a glorified volunteer, but my heart and passion was there, and I could have went full-time with my music and would have made a lot more money and had a lot more less stress, right? But God always like put it in my heart. He never gave me the green light to do that. And I loved what I was doing, with the youth and the young adults. And so, so I was wrestling with that, me and my wife, for a while. And finally, towards the end of 2001, that's when God was like, no, you need to step into this role. So finally, I told the church leadership, okay, I'll do it for a little while until we find the next person, because the pastor was burned out. And he was bivocational. He didn't get paid anything. And so he was burned out. He had like 2 other jobs, and, and so I stepped into the role, and within a few months I was like, I think we found him. It's me. Like, I think the guy. It's me. I'm supposed to do this. And so the biggest asset we had was we didn't have a lot of people on Sundays. There were still about 40 people, but most of them were young adults now because the demographics had shifted over those first 6 years. And we didn't have a lot of resources, didn't have a lot of money. But our biggest asset was freedom. So we got to reshape and redream and rethink of what, the urban church could look like to reach unchurched and dechurched, people, especially young adults that were elusive to the church. Most churches are trying to figure out, how do we reach the under 40 crowd? Well, I was 28 when I took over the church in 2002. And so it was, I was still in my 20s, and I was even wondering, is anybody over 28 going to even come to this church and follow me as their pastor? But surprisingly, in that first year, there were several people that jumped in that were in their 30s and 40s, and they were influenced by hip hop and urban culture, and they just loved the vibe, and they were all in. And then then we started to reach some parents and some grandparents, and we loved those people and valued them and honored them, and so our church is multi-generational. It does skew younger, but we have all ages that come. Our oldest member is 101.
Oh, praise God! God bless her or him. Is it him or her?
It's a him. African American dude that's 101, and he generally still walks without a cane. I mean, he's in great shape.
And I understand how you reach the grandparents and the parents, because they saw the difference in their children's lives and their grandchildren's lives, and they had to been like, well, what's different? What happened? It's this church. Now, did you ever think that your church would be like the flagship, if you will, of innovative churches?
Not really. But I mean, at the same time, we knew we were doing some stuff that was out of the box. And in 1999, when I got signed to a national record label, inside of the CD jacket, remember CDs?
Yes, back good times.
Yeah, right. Remember stores? We used to have to go to a music store.
I know. So actual record stores, those were actually, I miss record stores like that.
I do too. I used to love to browse and look through all the. I like looking at the artwork. Yeah. Anyway, inside of my CD jacket, I had a picture with me and my youth group, me and my wife and the youth group behind me, and there's about 200 kids in the picture, and there was a paragraph under it, just talked about the hip hop styled, youth ministry and the services and the concerts and the basketball league and all the unique things we were doing. So because that album was in stores nationally and people started buying it left and right, and they were seeing that, suddenly we started to get a wave of phone calls, emails, and people physically visiting us. Like literally every week, there'd be people visiting our youth service and even our Sunday service, because Florida is like a vacation mecca. So
Right.
people like, yo, I'm going to Orlando, to Disney, or I'm going to the beach, and let's go to Urban D's church, let's make that part of our trip. So that became like this thing where all these people were coming to visit us and see what we were doing. And so quickly we realized, like, wow, like we have something that's happening here that no one else is doing in the country, and people need to learn. Like we can help duplicate this. And so, so we started a conference in the year 2000 called Flavor Fest, and it's an urban leadership conference really to help church leaders, pastors, church planners, youth pastors, and artists, influencers in the city to be better at ministry and mission and even marketplace, because that we even have classes on entrepreneurship and all that. That's developed a little more recently. But so over the course of the last 20 years doing Flavor Fest, we've trained over 5,000 leaders. And so, as time went on, we realized, like, yeah, we have a voice, we have a responsibility. God is doing something special here. And the difference with kingdom and corporate is, in corporate, everybody has this trademarked, proprietary, secret formula, secret recipe, right? They don't want to share that with anyone. But in kingdom, we need to share what we're learning. We need to share what's been a win, and help other ministries and other leaders around the country. And hopefully they'll take it and they'll make it even better than what we did. So I love to help people and see them win even bigger than us. So there's been several church planners that I've been able to train, along the journey that I've done coaching and consulting. And I've watched them be able to, in the first year or two, be able to be way far ahead of where we were in the first year or two, because we didn't have anybody that was a model to look at or any like blue. And so, it's been great. We feel a responsibility. We're a teaching church.
The 4 books that you've written, one of them probably stands out more than anything, especially with everything that's going on right now. Love Our City, Learning to Love Our Neighbor as We Love Ourselves.
Yeah.
With all this that's going on right now, what could you share with people?
Yeah, so that book, I wrote it in 2018, and it came out at the end of 2018. And our church actually went through it together in 2019. And it's actually a 30-day devotional book. And so it's something that, is great to go together, to go through together with a group of people. And every 7 days, there's a small group video that you can watch on YouTube. And there's some fill in the blanks. There's a discussion guide. Every day, there's actually some space to journal of what God is kind of speaking to you. So we started doing this thing called Love Our City in 2017. And I had this crazy dream. I came to my staff and I said, hey guys, we do a lot of outreach and it's great, but we only have about 20%, maybe 30% of our church that gets involved in it. And the other group of people are just on the bench, and they might be cheering, but like we need to get more people involved. And so I said, what if we did an entire, instead of one day of when we do a back to school jam or some kind of outreach, I said, what if we did an entire week of serving projects? And I believe, like, what if we had 500 people serve and we did 50 projects? And so, my team was like, what? We never had 500 people do anything before at one time, And they're like, in 50 projects, what we'll come up with? So, we put a whiteboard up and I said, well, hey, who lives within a 3 to 4 mile radius of our church campus? Like, give me the demographics. And so we started to list the people groups up there. So we have college students, we have, business people, we have young families, we have people in poverty, we have single moms, we have homeless people, we have immigrants, so we have senior citizens. So we started listing all these people groups, and we said, listen, if we're going to love our city, we want to love all of our city.
Yes.
Not one particular demographic. And many times the church, the capital C church, when we think of an outreach, a lot of times, let's be honest, it boils down to, it's the church giving away stuff to poor people.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now,
in that neighborhood.
we need to do that because a lot of
Yeah.
churches don't. We need to
Yeah.
reach the least of these and give away food and backpacks and all that. But what about the family that doesn't have kids? They don't need a backpack. They don't need a toy at Christmas. Or what about the middle class family that has kids but they don't need the assistance? How do you reach them? How do you reach affluent people? How do you, because they need the love of Jesus as well. So we began to brainstorm and put projects together that could reach each one of those demographics, from appreciation lunches for teachers and firefighters and police officers and clinic workers, to pay it forward projects that can reach all demographics. From we're buying everybody's coffee at Starbucks, which they don't need us to do that, but they'll take it, to we're going to the laundromat and we're paying for everybody's laundry, and the people there, man, that's a blessing. They need that. But all these different demographics we're able to reach, through all these different, unique projects. And so, so we did that in 2017, and instead of 500 people showing up, we had 600 people show up, and we ended up doing 70 projects. In 2018, we leveled up. We did 107 projects with 1,000 people. And in 2019, we did 152 projects with over 1,500 people, and several hundred people served that don't even go to our church. They were friends from people's jobs, and companies came in as team building projects, and they sponsored a project, and then they brought their team to come and serve. And so in 2019, we had 95% of the projects, which was like a $30,000 budget. 95% of it was paid for through corporate sponsors. That didn't happen right away, but it was like, as we built this reputation and we figured out how to market it to companies, and we got community partners involved and business leaders in the church, they donated from their companies. And so it was just amazing. So as people watch this, everyone started to call me that follows me on social media and follows our church, and was like, hey man, you got to teach us how to do Love Our City. And so I started doing workshops and webinars and consulting on that. And then eventually that's when God put on my heart, this is your next book. You need to do a book. And so I started writing the book, and then I was at the Purpose Driven conference in the summer of 2018. The book was like 3/4 of the way written, and I was just there to receive, me and my wife. And Pastor Rick Warren, his number 2 guy, came to me and said, hey, Pastor Rick wants you to teach with him this afternoon. Here's his notes. Can you do it? And the pastor's there. And so I'm just
You're like okay.
I'm like, oh, it's in 2 hours from now, and I'm like, speak with the Pastor Rick Warren, like the number 1 selling author in the world, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll do it, and normally I'm not nervous. Like, I could jump up, and you could, at the drop of a dime, I could get up and preach on something that's in my back pocket. I could preach on Love Our City or Rebuild, or something I'm passionate about. But they're like, here's Pastor Rick's notes. Teach this, And so you talk about
2 hours. Go.
talk about pressure. It was pressure, but God helped me, and it went amazing. And they invited me to actually come back and speak in 2019 at the conference, and I had a couple months notice that time, so it was good. But at that conference, that's when God kind of spoke to me and said, turn this book into a 30-day devotional book, not an instructional book, but a devotional book. And so the bottom line is, it really helps people, instead of just doing a serving project and it's a one-hit wonder, but for people to really get the theology deep down in their heart, to learn the words of Jesus. What does it mean to love your neighbor as you love yourself? And so the book really kind of walks through, like, why don't we do that more often? What's the problem? And then what's the solution? How do we get there? And then, of course, the book talks about a lot of the, things that we do with the serving projects, and encourages the people that are reading it to come up with a service project with their small group, or, if their church is doing it together. And it kind of walks them through and gets them ready, so the action step after they finish the book, or towards the end of the book, is to do this, serving week, and to do a serving project or 2. And so it's been amazing. We created this leaders box kit for other churches that has all the tools and details in it on how churches can, do Love Our City from A to Z, how to put the projects together, how to raise the money, how to recruit the volunteers, and also, how to, so everybody we touch at all these projects, they get an invite card to the Love Our City party. And the party is that Sunday at church. And so we have hundreds and hundreds of new visitors that come to church that weekend. And we've had hundreds of people start a relationship with Jesus on that Sunday the last few years, and over 100 people get baptized. And so it's been amazing. So we're watching this movement really start to spread, throughout the country, as over 200 other churches have gotten a box kit. And now with COVID, and the racial injustice that we've seen more than ever, like, this is a great resource. So as churches begin to reopen, they can do Love Our City, take their church through the book, and then do this big serving week and reach their neighbor. And many times your neighbor, one of the core things of the book is that many times your neighbor is different than you. Yeah. And that's okay. God can use you to reach your neighbor that's different.
On your YouTube channel, you did a post with a few of your church members about George Floyd and what's going on right now.
Yeah.
Can you share that again? Because I absolutely loved it, especially because it was coming from four if you include you, four different viewpoints of the feeling and the reaction of that. And I loved your raw honesty about it too. I'm going to put that out there too. But yeah, can you share that with everyone, please?
Sure, Lily. I'm impressed. You did your research.
Amen.
Watching everything and watching what we're doing lately. Yeah. So we were doing a series on the book of James, and we entitled it "Not Everything You're Counting Counts," because James talks about count it all joy, even when you go through troubles.
Yes.
And normally we don't count joys as we don't count troubles as joy, or it could bring joy, right? But everybody's counting stuff right now. They're counting the death toll from the virus, the infection rate, counting the unemployment numbers, and then of course people are personally counting, their feelings, their freedoms, their finances, and so with that series, we were going through the book of James, and chapter 2, it just so happened that the week that everything happened with George Floyd, all that popped off. And we were in chapter 2. And if you're familiar with James chapter 2, it talks about prejudice and favoritism. Mm-hmm. And so it just fit in absolutely perfect. The Lord lined that up. And we were going to talk about the stuff with Ahmaud Arbery that week anyways. But then the George Floyd stuff happened. And that night before, the message actually aired, which was the very beginning, end of May, beginning of June. There was a bunch of protests that turned violent right in our neighborhood. And there was, some riots and looting and burned buildings right on our street. And our church was right in the middle of that. And so people were really leaning in like, oh my gosh, is the church building okay? And praise God, our church was untouched. I mean, God protected and the neighborhood respected. The neighborhood knows what we do and how we love our city. We've been feeding thousands of families even since the pandemic started, with groceries and hot meals. And so, we went right into action with that. But so that message, I preached it from in front of the courthouse because we wanted to talk about justice. And then I walked down the block to the park, and I met up with a diverse panel from our church. And we had a young Hispanic young lady that's 19 years old. So we wanted to hear from the next generation and how she's feeling. Then a white guy that's in his late 50s that goes to our church, he runs a tech company, well-to-do guy, but he's actually married to a Bohemian. So his wife is black and his kids are mixed. And so just to talk to someone like him that's grown up in, having a mixed family and some of the stuff that he's had to navigate. And then the other person that was part of the panel was a guy that goes to our church, African-American guy in his late 20s, and he was a former USF football player, star, and then he actually was signed to the Bucs, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and played with them briefly. And so he's a real big guy, and he shared a story of some stuff that he went through with police, and where he was in a car accident, some lady hit him, and then he called the police to come, and they were like
interrogating him,
interrogating him and helping her. And he's like, wait a minute, I'm the one that got hit, and the guy's like, just give me your license. And so he has his, permit to carry. And so he told the cop's walking with him to the car. And he said, hey, listen, my license is in my glove compartment. I have a, concealed weapon permit, and I have a weapon, in my glove compartment. So if you want to go ahead and just take my license out of there so I don't have to touch anything, And the cop was like, no, you can go ahead and get it. But as he's reaching for it, he looks and sees the cop is like pulling his gun out. And he's like, hold on, wait a minute. He's
Right.
like, I feel scared for my life right now. Like, what are you doing? He's like, nah, just get your license. Don't do anything stupid. He's like, man, I called you. Like, I didn't do anything here. Like, you can take my license. I'm not, And so anyways, it's just, that kind of stuff that, people of color have to go through regularly. And many times people don't even realize, people that aren't of color don't realize what that pressure and what those circumstances and experiences can feel like when you go through that on a regular basis. It's exhausting. And then when you see, more and more stuff on social media of people being, murdered or people being falsely accused and interrogated and treated wrong and all that stuff, it's been a heavy season. So it's been the virus, and then there's this, the second wave of all this injustice. And I think it was just a pressure cooker. And so the church, like, we have to talk about it. Our church has been talking about this stuff from the jump. But it's good to see that the capital C church, even a lot of white evangelical churches and leaders, they're beginning to finally wake up and talk about this. And I've had a lot of phone calls with a lot of white pastors that call me, that trust me, and have been picking my brain. And, because they're beginning to finally have these conversations on Sundays with their church now, which is definitely needed.
Yeah, because I actually saw the news footage of you getting interviewed when that incident happened next to your church,
Yeah.
and you boldly told the interviewer how you felt about everything that's going on. You don't see that too often, because usually when the same race is having a conversation, they shy away and they try to make it seem like they don't want to show too much empathy, just enough, but not completely to seem like they're rooting for the other side, if you will.
Yeah.
But you were just bold-facedly, flat-footed, and was like, look, these are the stands that we need to make. These are things that we need to do on our end as a whole, as a community, and show each other empathy for one another.
Yeah.
How was the response from the people in your area when they saw that interview?
Yeah, for that particular interview, it was wonderful. A lot of people know who I am and where I stand, because it's not the first time I've talked about this stuff at all. And our church is very diverse. It's predominantly minorities. We're probably about 80% minorities. And so, that's my family, that's my people. So of course I'm gonna stand up and talk about it. All the people that follow me on social media, for the most part, they get it. They know who I am. So I don't really have like a lot of trolls or, but there was a couple posts that I put up that there was a few people that put stuff up, and I don't know who they were. They weren't from my church or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But just, even when I put some stuff up about the looting and stuff like that, and I put multiple posts up, but one guy was just, kind of attacking me like, why aren't you denouncing the looting? I see what you're doing, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I challenged him. I was like, did you watch some of my previous posts? Not. I don't just be, and so the thing is I agree. Language is so important. I'm an author, I'm a writer, I'm a speaker, language is, I'm a rapper, spoken word artist. So words are very important. But I think in this culture we're in right now, sometimes there's people that are so overly sensitive. And if you don't say the words or the phrases exactly like they want, or, oh, you didn't denounce, the looting, so what's wrong with you? It's like, wait a minute, did you take in context everything I've been talking about in the last couple days or
Right.
the last couple weeks or months or years of my life? How can you think that I'm for that? Like, I understand the frustration, absolutely, and I understand the anger. And there's a place for anger. Anger can be a catalyst for change. But the Bible says, in your anger, do not sin. And when you destroy someone's property and livelihood and their business, like, that's sin. And
Right.
I'm not advocating for that. But just because I didn't clearly spell that out, in that post, and so I challenged him. I said, man, my heart is grieved. I know those people that their business is burned down. Those are our partners. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we've done stuff together. The restaurant that burned down, we bought hundreds of meals from them on Friday to feed people in our community, and then Saturday their business burned down. So do you know those people? Have you partnered with them?
Right.
Our community place? If not,
Right.
then be quiet. You can unfollow. Like, and so, and of course there was a bunch of other people that jumped on and were like, having my back and stuff.
Right.
I just always tell people, just be nice though, be nice. We can be firm, but
Right.
we need to go off on somebody. But, he ended up responding back and apologized. But some people, they want to just, they're not going to apologize. They're going to keep going in and saying stuff. And so, generally on social media, I don't respond to that stuff, but I don't have a whole lot of people that come at me with that at this point, because so many people, they just kind of know, where we're at. And, for the most part, we've had favor, and God's given us this, respect that most people just respect what we do.
Yes. What do you think is the hardest thing for people who aren't directly affected by Black Lives Matter for them to understand? What do you think is the hardest part for them to get?
Yeah, I think the hardest part for them to get is because they may not be affected by it because they don't have relationships with people of color. So if you don't have, hey, well, I know my mailman's Black, or, my friend at work's Hispanic, but if you're not really in a real relationship closely with someone of color, and you've had experiences and their background and they've shared stories and you've, lamented for some things they've been through. If you've never had that experience, or you don't have any real friends of color, then for a lot of white people, it's off their radar. So they don't even realize the struggle and the experience and the things that are in policy and systems that have held people of color back. Even if you just look at, the wealth gap between African Americans and white people, the African Americans have 1/10 of the wealth. And now they do make less money, but I think it's like they make 60% of the amount of money, but they only have 10% of the amount of wealth. Well, if you look through all American history with, Jim Crow laws and racism and the way redlining was and the way real estate markets were and mortgages were given out and just education, all those things, those systems that were put in place, it's really hard for African Americans to break through that. Some absolutely do, but it's really difficult because of these systems that were put in place. And so people of color, Hispanics as well, are behind in so many ways. And so, but a lot of white people just don't realize that. They'll say, well, I mean, everybody's pretty much equal, like we had a Black president, and, they'll just make comments like that. And then they'll jump in and be like, well, they hear Black Lives Matter, and well, all lives matter, and my answer to that is like, well, duh. Of course, all lives matter. We're made in the image of God. All of us matter. But right now, Black lives are not being treated in the same way that white lives are, or other lives. And so we need to speak up for them. We need to help them right now, And so at the core of the message of Black Lives Matter, I totally get it. I agree with that. I don't agree with everything that the organization itself advocates for, but a challenge that a friend of mine, Dr. Eric Mason, made. He's a pastor and an author, and I love his stuff. He's spoken at our conference before. And, he said, what if the church, the capital C church, would have already been speaking up for Black people and people of color? And what if the church would have been the ones that formed Black Lives Matter? Like, how different could have that movement looked if we would have been the ones that stepped up, when the stuff started breaking out with Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice and all these other names, these hashtags that have happened over the years, when the church, the white evangelical American church, for the most part, just stayed quiet, didn't really say anything, maybe didn't really know what to do, or maybe said, well, yeah, we're praying for those people, but that's not really affecting our church,
Right.
And now there's finally being a wake-up call. So even though it's been a difficult season, I'm hopeful because there's been a lot of progress, and we've been having conversations with churches and leaders that we've never had these kind of conversations before. They're finally getting woke, and so it's good.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. How are you and your family doing during this quarantine?
Yeah, so we're good. We're here in Florida. So in Florida, in May, things started to lift, and the case number here, at least in our area, in Miami, it was higher, but in Tampa, the amount of cases was really low. And so we didn't know anyone that was sick, and it was pretty safe to begin to come back out, and things began to open up little by little. And all through the month of May, it just kept getting better and better, and the case numbers kept getting lower. And we're like, okay, we're going to get back to normal. And a lot of churches were beginning to reopen at the end of May, beginning of June. And we just felt like we're going to wait a little longer. So my church, we said, well, we're going to let all them go first, and we're going to learn from them. And we feel like, a lot of our people are a little more hesitant anyways, because we're predominantly minorities and they've been impacted more by COVID. And so we said, let's just wait. And a lot of those churches only had like 30-40% of the congregation coming back at first. And we just felt like that's not a win. That's going to feel deflating. The room is pretty empty, and a lot of volunteers don't feel ready to come back. And, it's just, let's just wait another month and a half. And by that time, if everything stays in the same trajectory, it'll be good, and we can reopen with 60-70% of people, and it'll be more normal. People won't have to wear masks as much, and it'll be a strong opening, and we can begin to, move forward with the new normal. And so that was the plan. But then about 3 weeks ago, we started to see an uptick in cases. And fast forward to, this week, it's been the highest uptick. And so we had in Hillsborough County, we had at the most, like back in April, like 60 cases a day, new cases. And but it dropped in May to where we only had like 10 cases, 20 cases, some days 5 cases. So we're like, oh man, we're trending in the right direction. This is good. Mm-hmm. But then, the beginning of June, we started to hit like 100 cases a day. We're like, oh, snap. Like, we never saw that before.
Right.
And go back down. The next day it was like 40. And we're like, okay, there's this little blip in the radar. They're testing more. And they are testing more. But this week we saw, new cases amounts in the 300s. And then Wednesday we hit 700. And then Thursday and today it's been in the 400s. And so it's just, it's crazy. And now we did yesterday for the first time have some people in our church that tested positive, and they're not very sick. They're younger. They don't have fevers or anything. They're just quarantining. They're like, yeah, we got headaches and little body aches, but we're coughing a little bit, but we're okay. We're getting better actually already. But so it's like it's getting real. So now the disappointing thing is we realize, like, man, we're probably not going to be able to open back up next month now. We're going to have to push back indefinitely. And so just to be honest with you, it's disappointing. Either like we're trying to re-ramp back up, and, everyone's getting tired of online church because we miss each other, that in-person interaction and community. But now, like, we're having to go back to the drawing board and say, yeah, we're going to be doing this probably now for a couple more months. So we have to kind of reinvent ourselves again. And so pray for us and pray for every church, And
yes.
We didn't reopen because some of these churches that reopened they're like, yeah, we might have to close now. And that would have been even tougher, I think.
How can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, the best way to contact me, you can follow me on social media, and it's real easy. It's Urban D 813. So it rhymes. 813 area code. So Urban D 813. You can follow me on Instagram or Facebook, and then my YouTube channel is Urban D 813. And we just recently launched the Flavor Fest Urban Leadership Podcast, and we have that on the podcast platforms. But if you want to watch it, we do have a video version too, and that's on my YouTube channel, Urban D 813. And we've had some of the same guests. You had Montel Jordan, and actually Montel is a friend of mine, and he was actually on the very first podcast when we launched it about 2 months ago. And so we've had a lot of different pastors and Christian hip hop artists and entrepreneurs, and some really interesting conversations we've had.
And here's your last question. You ready?
Yes, ma'am.
If you could have any song be your theme song when you walked into a room, what would it be and why?
I would say, oh man, that's tough. I was just gonna joke around and say this is how we do it because we talk about Montel. But I'd say if it was one of my songs, yeah, if it was someone else's song, Montel's. If it was my song, I'd say probably the Love Our City song. We have a Love Our City song that I did, and my daughter actually sings on the hook. She just turned 17, and then another guy from the church raps on it. And we talking about loving our city and loving our neighbors. We love ourselves. And in a world of hate, we're going to love. And so, yeah, that's on my YouTube channel too. We did a music video for that song. It's called Love Our City. There's actually 2 versions of it.
Okay.
So thanks for having me on. Thanks for what you're doing, and praying for you and the work you're doing, and all the listeners out there. Much love. And it was good to get connected and meet y'all. Stay connected with me.
Thank you. Have a good one. Be safe.
All right. God bless y'all. Peace.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for being on my show, and thank you for your ministry. God is truly going to bless you for showing us that your background, your race, color, or creed has nothing to do with the love of God. And if you would like to be on Worldly Church Girl, click the link below, shoot me an email, and let's see what we can do with that thing. And what I tell y'all, you need to hit that subscription button. You don't want to miss another episode. What are you waiting for? Click, 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 click it. And as always, thanks for joining your one and only Worldly Church Girl.